Well, apologies for that.
Order, order. Welcome to the Treasury Select Committee on Tuesday, the 13th of January 2026. Today we're examining the work of His Majesty's Revenue and Customs, or otherwise known as HMRC, which is a regular session, and we're pleased to invite back for his second outing in front of us John Paul Marks, the first Permanent Secretary and Chief Executive who's been in the post not quite a year yet. He's joined by Cerys MacDonald, who's the Director of Individuals Policy. Perhaps you could explain, Ms MacDonald, what Individuals Policy is. That's a new term for us on the committee.
Of course. So there are a range of policy directors within HMRC that obviously lead our policy and technical functions. I have responsibility for income tax, national insurance, taxation of pensions, savings and charities, and I also oversee our work on child benefit and tax-free childcare.
Thank you very much, and welcome to your first Treasury Select Committee meeting. They're joined by Jonathan Russell, who's the Chief Executive of the Valuation Office Agency, which is now incorporated within HMRC. And has that incorporation fully taken place, Mr. Russell?
No, it starts on the 1st of April. We're working hard to make sure the transition is smooth, but it will start on the 1st of April. And it's fair to say it's a process rather than an event, but it will be formally part of HMRC on the 1st of April.
Always wise not to have a deadline that can be missed in front of a committee. Thank you very much. And then they're joined by Jonathan Athau, who is the Director General for Customer Strategy and Tax Design. So I think a few of the technical questions may be coming towards you, Mr. Athau. I just wanted to kick off with you, Mr. Marks. You've been Permanent Secretary for 9 months now. How's it been?
It's broadly going well. So underlying service standards are improving. So we're answering more phone calls more quickly than we were this time last year. And we reported in our annual report and accounts record yield last year of about 48 billion. We think we're on track to exceed that again this year, but we'll wait and see. Obviously, we're into quarter 4, which is peak demand on self-assessments. We're ahead of schedule from where we were last year. But this is a busy quarter for us, so we'll see where we are on our service standards end of this quarter, but we're obviously aiming to hit them. We published a debt strategy alongside the budget. Debt's come down by about £1 billion, and we're aiming to bring that down as a percentage of receipts year on year over the next few years as well. And obviously we've stepped through a significant budget, so that's 3 fiscal events now with this government. So if we look at the tax gap, where the OBR show an illustrative scenario in their publication of that falling over the next forecast period, and taken together the tax gap packages make up about 10 billion of additional tax revenue than what would otherwise been. It's mainly more capacity, but also transformation and policy change, which we could get into.
Okay, and you've been out in public talking about nurturing a kinder environment at HMRC. Did you think you inherited an environment that wasn't kind, and is it kindness to staff or kindness to customers?
I think it needs to be both. I think we care deeply about our charter, which obviously we are required to operate according to our charter under the law. And quite right too. So there's important standards in there around fairness, around keeping customer data secure, and we want to live up to that standard. I've been talking a lot with the team about working in the open. We'll talk about some of the things that I'm sure we've had challenges with this year, child benefits, national insurance. We've had some bumps in the road. We try and respond as rapidly as we can to those and be open about the problem and then fix it fast, and then learn well from it. So that has been something I've been talking a lot about. Been working a lot on engagement with the team. I think it's very important to think about purpose within the organisation. We've seen engagement improve this year, which is great. I think the data will be published shortly from the Cabinet Office, so I won't sort of preempt that, but for HMRC we're very pleased with the progress we've made with our engagement, but of course more to do. So yes, leading with kindness is a thing that we thought a lot about in the Scottish Government. I think it's important, particularly in an environment that is contentious, it's challenging, it's moving at pace. There will, as I say, be bumps in the road. Our job is to create an environment to look after our customers, engage well with our partners, and look after our teams, so we learn from those moments and continue to try and improve outcomes.
Okay, well, Mr. Mason.
Can I just take you back to the tax gap and the progress that you expect to make over the profile of the
Very
reduction?
ambitious.
Because it seems to be, and I suspect all governments have got a tendency to do this, to be optimistic at the end of the period. How do you feel about that, and what's the sort of conversation with the OBR around sort of verifying whether that's realistic? Because it's easy for any government to say, well, we're going to put in these measures, and by the end of the period we're going to have a massive increase in revenues effectively at the end of the period.
It's a very steep curve, isn't it?
Very steep. How do you feel about that? And do you reference what's been said in previous fiscal events, in previous governments, about how likely it is to get to that point?
Yeah. I'll bring Jonathan in if I could, just on the point around the conversation with the OBR and realistic assumptions, and where there'll be certain measures that will have a higher degree of uncertainty, if I may. But just on your underlying point, I think we are clear in HMRC that we have a very stretching transformation ahead of us. We've made a good start. I'm pleased with the progress of the first year, but you are quite right that the scale of ambition in these three fiscal events now, in terms of the level of onboarding of new capacity that we're doing, the consolidation of that capability, the increase in things like the amount of chargeable decisions, investigations, the work we've got to do on transformation with third-party data and on risking, it is significant. We've got Making Tax Digital rollout through this period as well, to commence from the spring. But having said all of that, all of those assumptions have been stress tested carefully. The OBR will look at what they think is prudent and underpinned by evidence and data, so they're not sort of just hopeful assumptions. They're underpinned by the data and evidence that we have. But you're quite right. Each year we'll publish progress and be transparent on how we're moving through it. And if we need to make adjustments because we're not quite on track, we'll be open about that.
The OBR is obviously looking at the money side, but you've got an awful lot of change. Just some of the things we're going to talk about today that come out of the budget. Pensions, the Valuation Office Agency coming in, business rate changes, ISA changes. There's an awful lot of complications because of the nature of the budget, smaller decisions rather than one big tax change. So that's about your people and the complex processes that you're going to have to introduce. Is HMRC able to cope?
Yeah, we are, and we work very hard on doing the feasibility assessments of those measures.
For any advice to ministers?
As part of advice to ministers, so that we can be confident that the budget is indeed feasible. The last thing anyone wants is that to not be the case. So, we can talk about, Keris can talk about the changes we're making on ISAs. We've actually taken an additional year to give ourselves time for monthly mandatory reporting of ISA data, which we think will help industry.
So some of those deadlines announced in the budget because of that technical advice you were giving ministers about what was feasible.
That's right.
Okay.
So if I take something like low value imports, we've deliberately given ourselves time to properly consult, to understand industry feedback, look at what is going on in the States and what Europe does. And there are calls for us to actually move faster, but we recognise we should take care.
We're going to come into some of the detail on those individual things, but sitting at the top of this, large organisations growing by the minute, it seems, more kings keep coming into HMRC. What are the areas that worry you most, that keep you awake at night, the things that you think you've still got a bit of work to do to be sure you can really deliver on?
So you are right that when you look at any individual measure, you can do a feasibility assessment and convince yourself it's all fine. When you take the whole thing together and you look at the dependencies, that is where sometimes the rubber can hit the road. We think we have phased all of these measures over the next 5 years in a way that manages all of those dependencies. But there is no doubt that this year we onboard a new contact centre system, a new case management system. We start this exiting of our legacy data centres, Making Tax Digital. There are quite a lot of key dependencies into, for example, our core ETMP system, or with our CSER system, where our change portfolio leads are constantly managing the dependencies to make sure that the plans align. At the moment, we are rating our portfolio as amber and on a good track. We had some amber red ratings because of getting some of our procurements away and our approvals and some uncertainty there, but that is now done. I think the final point, just on your point of what keeps you sort of awake at night, is then the underlying resilience and security threat. So last time we were here, we talked about PAYE and organised crime. It does feel to me that we are operating in an environment where the threat environment is constantly changing and is high. So that our plans could always be disrupted by some sort of malicious attack that we have to handle. But as I say, we're improving our underlying resilience to respond to those.
Okay, yeah.
But it is always a concern.
Well, there's huge digital challenges, and then finally you've had another change of minister. So I think you personally have been through two ministers. And Minister Tomlinson is still chair of the HMRC board. Can you give an example of what different or better decisions have been made because there's a minister chairing the board at HMRC?
Well, the thing, if I think back to the spending review, when I first came into my role, we were going through things like the zero-based review and then using that to inform assumptions around the spending settlement. And it's back to the conversation we've just had about us being able to be with ministers and talk about the hard reality of delivering transformation, the need for time to phase complex measures into delivery. And we've had this conversation before. It's not that those conversations couldn't happen under previous governments, of course, and there's close relationships between HMRC officials and government ministers. But yes, the Exchequer Secretary chairs the board, and that's an opportunity for him to hear the totality of the portfolio, hear our portfolio team talk about portfolio risk and dependencies as an example. And I think because of that good policy partnership, we're able to ensure our feasibility assessments inform budget advice, and we're able to be confident that our message is being heard when we think we need more time to deliver a complex measure.
I'm picking that. It seems that you're suggesting that ministers have a better understanding of what problems might be caused by a policy before they formulated the policy. Is that a fair summary of what you've said?
I think the opportunity of the chairing of the board is the opportunity to hear the totality on a regular basis from the team with the non-executives. But that doesn't mean it couldn't have been done before. It just was done in a different forum in a different way.
Indeed. Well, we're looking forward to having the Exchequer Secretary in front of us regularly as he chairs the board. So, then Harriet.
May I, Chair? Your predecessor used to like to shut down the phone lines for the public with little notice and try and force everyone to use the app and digital paths. I presume that's still part of the strategic direction you want to take things. Can you update us on how that's going?
Yes, so we do want to achieve a digital first organisation. We are at around 80% of our customer interactions are now digital. That was around 75% this time last year. The objective is to get to 90% by 2030, so we're on the right track. Absolutely, we want to create a digital service offer that is compelling, that people want to use it. So we see good traffic on the app, people are taking it up and using it a lot, and we're putting more features online all the time.
Numbers on that, please?
Sorry?
What are the numbers on that?
I'll just grab them for you. But your point on phone lines, we do not have any plans to shut any phone lines down to drive the channel shift. But on the app, to get the latest, average speed of answer was 13 minutes at the end of our Q2 relative to 22 minutes of the previous year. And our latest take-up on the app, where might I find it? Have you got it there?
I don't think I have it.
If you can get out to us.
I'll get it back to you in 1 second.
If we can get out, if there's someone behind you, I'm sure who will be able to.
Here we are, forgive me. 7.3 million unique users of the app in 2025. That's up 2.1 million on 2024. So good growth. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful. And obviously we'll continue to watch the phone line thing. Have you put in any provision because of the changes in the budget for extra staff on the phone line?
So overall, the budget gives us about 1,000 additional headcount. That is mainly low-value imports, valuation office for high-value council tax surcharge, And yes, there will be some residual.
That's in addition to the other staff that you were recruiting, the 5,500 or so that you're part with. So where are you through that first recruitment, and what's the timetable for the recruitment of the additional staff from the budget?
Our headcount went up to just over 2,000 this year. We're ahead of our compliance capacity build, which is the message to the compliance team. So back to the point around optimism in the forecast. So can we get ahead of it? So we've established a compliance academy for all the training. The onboarding has been going well, but I have to be honest, we're having to work hard across all regions of the UK to fill our recruitment. We are managing to do it, but we're not doing it by a big margin, if I can be transparent about that.
What's the issues there?
Well, I mean, it's quite high volume. I mean, it's a commitment to come in and take on, tax training and go through our training process. So I think we just got to keep making sure we're looking at our recruitment process, we're reaching all corners of the labour market and being an attractive employer and giving people the opportunity.
So there is a risk in that. Although you're ahead of it, there is a risk you're worrying about.
Yeah, I think whenever you've got to climb a mountain on a capacity build, it was the same with 13,500 work coaches. You sort of got to keep the velocity.
Yeah, we've covered those figures before, so you've got the rest to come, and then you've got this 1,000 from the budget. How long is that going to take? Because we're going to come to the property and value office agency later, but how long is it going to take to get those people on board? Because that's on top of the existing.
They're quite. I mean, I know 1,000 sounds a lot, but that's sort of over the SR period. I think it peaks in 27, 28. 28, 29, those are the two peak years, and it is particularly about council tax surcharge, which Jonathan could talk a bit about the plan for, and low value imports, which is back end loaded towards later in the period. Okay,
so that's quite a lot of people. What are these graduate trainees or?
I'll let Jonathan talk about the nature of the Workforce Valuation Office, if I may, but for customs and excise for low value imports, yes, it will be sort of AOEO grade to do the administration around customer service support as that system goes live.
And is AI having an impact? Because when we talk to people in the banking sector, they say a lot of those junior jobs will go because of AI. Is that something that you're looking at HMRC?
We're using AI already, of course, embedded into things like our risking tools and our data to enable us to spot compliance risks and to make sure that we're targeting our compliance resources effectively. We think that we can use AI to augment our agent experience and improve outcomes. So an example at the moment, which we've been testing, is around telephony summarisation. So as I am taking the call, the system is summarising for me what the call outcome was and the next best step. So it's still led by the agent, but augmented by AI. As an organisation overall, we are broadly the same size in 2030 as we are today. So we onboard a lot into our front line for compliance and debt, a bit more now for customs and for valuation. At the same time, we have quite stretching efficiency targets to reduce the size of our core operation to balance the books. And so there will be both onboarding of new resources and then moving or retraining of capacity within the organisation. Of course, AI offers efficiency, but for those colleagues working in the organisation, we think it augments their experience rather than replaces them.
Okay, well, we'll get into some of those things in more detail in relation to some of the specific issues of the budget. And I want to move on to the taxation of the state pension. The Chancellor made a very firm commitment on television saying that no one who's just on the state pension would be taxed.
Yeah.
But is that, well, so first of all, how many people are on just the state pension? How many people just receive the state pension? What's the figure for that?
If I may, I might ask Keris to come in.
Ms MacDonald.
Keris, on you go.
Yeah, no, of course. First, if you don't mind, just to explain how the state pension is currently taxed. So the state pension is currently
yes, it is currently
taxable.
But this is people who only receive it and they're under the personal allowance.
Yeah. So,
but because it's going to cross over in 27, that's because there's more than. Yeah. So how many state pensioners are there?
So forgive me, it is quite difficult to estimate because, as you will appreciate, the state pension is quite complicated. Even though we talk about people on the basic state pension or the new state pension, the actual value of pension they receive can vary. So I haven't got a sort of official figure to share.
Ballpark.
I would say ballpark between 800,000 and 1 million. We are talking about here. And would you like me to explain a little bit more about what the Chancellor's announced and how we are responding
perhaps
as
if
an
I can answer
organisation?
questions and then see if you can,
Yeah,
and
of
if
course.
you need to add anything. So there are we can work out at least 3 different types of pensioners. So you'll have the old state pension, the new state pension, the people who have deferred their pension, who therefore will be getting more than the annual, 27, quite a bit more potentially than the annual tax-free allowance. Will they all not have to pay tax?
So what the Chancellor's been really clear about is, at the moment, the only mechanism we have within HMRC to recover tax from those who are only in receipt of a state pension and have no other form of income, don't complete a self-assessment, is called a simple assessment. Is when we send a tax bill after the end of the tax year, often unexpectedly. We currently use that mechanism for about 1.3 million taxpayers. So it is a kind of administrative tool that we've got that we currently do use, but not for a large population. The Chancellor has been very clear that she does not want people who are currently only in receipt of the state pension to receive that tax bill after the end of the tax
only
year.
in receipt. So even if you've deferred your pension and you're getting a much higher state pension, or a significantly higher amount.
What the Chancellor's sort of said publicly is a high-level policy intent, and she has referred to individuals in receipt of the new state pension and the basic state pension. There's clearly a lot of detail to still work through, and she has said that detail will be set out in due course. But I can reassure the committee that we are working hand in glove with the Treasury on these options to make sure that the final decision is operable from April 27.
Okay, so it's quite complex, isn't it? So if you're a state pensioner now and you're going to cross over in 27, which is going to be everybody on the state pension, but then you've got a different arrangement because of the new, the old, the people who opted out with SERPs, as I say, the deferral. You can't tell us at this point whether those people will have to pay tax, because you're saying that the Chancellor's wording was this basic state pension and the new state pension. Is that they're the ones in scope?
The full policy detail obviously was not announced at the budget. Yeah. The Chancellor signalled what her policy intent was and said that further detail will be set out in due course.
Very clear in the interview. Nobody on the just receiving the state pension will pay tax. She repeated it, I think.
And that is absolutely her policy intent. What I'm just trying to be careful of is that there's a lot of detail underpinning that.
So what are the key challenges for you then in trying to implement that policy so that it works?
So the key challenges are any policy decision here will require legislation, so we'll be working with the Treasury and Ministers to bring forward legislation to support that policy intent in the next finance bill. We have mobilised a project team already in anticipation of this change. Yes, there is detail to work through, but in effect what we will need is a statutory basis to amend the tax calculation engine to just remove the tax liability for that cohort. There are plenty of other features of the tax system where we reduce the liability. I can see you want to come in. Would you like to?
Mr. Glenn, yes.
Yeah, of course.
Sorry, I'm just a bit confused. If the threshold doesn't change and the triple lock progressively each year accelerates and increases the amount of basic state pension that somebody receives, there is a difference between those two amounts, which is taxable. It gets bigger over time.
Yeah.
So if we take, which we will, the Chancellor's words to mean that, what essentially she must either be saying is she's going to increase the threshold to take people out of tax, or there's going to be a special measure to stop pensioners who only receive the basic state pension from paying tax. Is that a reasonable conclusion?
And it is the latter that we are talking about here. There are lots of examples in the tax system whereby we reduce someone's tax liability based on either their personal circumstances or the characteristics of their income. This will just be another one of those features.
Another complexity for you to deal with.
You could argue it's a complexity. What it will do, though, is it will remove the tax liability from let's say 1 million pensioners, which will avoid them and us having to go through a simple assessment process. So it is a simplification for those low-income pensioners.
Back, you said at the beginning you couldn't give us a figure for people just receiving the state pension. So will people have to make a declaration that they only receive the state pension?
So HMRC and DWP have a regular data exchange on those receiving the state pension to inform our wider work on collecting the tax from those higher up the income scale. So I do not expect there to be any customer sort of requirement here or to apply for this. We should be able to automate it, but I don't want to preempt too much of the detail here, because as I indicated, the Chancellor did say she would set out the full detail later this year, and we're working through those options with her now.
Okay, but if you're receiving a small occupational pension that just takes you over, and you could be treated differently.
Yeah, we have existing mechanisms in place to recover tax on the state pension via occupational pensions, because pension schemes do operate PAYE at the moment.
Okay, but they could be treated differently to people who just received the state pension. It's just you've got a small occupational pension. You could end up with a differential position for pensioners receiving a small...
You could, but as I sort of said, the Chancellor said in more detail, and I think the sort of the work we will be doing with the Treasury at the moment is to make sure we can define the population and look at interactions with other customers in different but similar circumstances.
So basically, this is a question we will need to put to the Minister then when the Minister's next in front of us about... well, maybe next time we have the Pensions Minister in front of us, maybe, but to discuss... So the policy will actually be honed and defined in the Finance Bill.
Yes.
So the policy intent, you're saying, is high level. So the devil will be in the detail, and that will be in the next not this Finance Bill.
We're working really closely with ministers to support that.
So in time frame, when does this have to go through Parliament for you to be able to implement it at HMRC?
We would expect this to go through the next Finance Bill in the autumn, but we have mobilised a project team already in anticipation of needing to make this change, because the mechanism that we would normally use without a mitigation to recover this tax is simple assessment. Normally we wouldn't be processing that for 27-28 until after the end of the 28 tax year, so we have got a decent run in here. I'm not worried about delivering timescales.
We'll no doubt be coming back to this because there's an awful lot still to be done.
And I know public interest is high.
Thank you. So I'm going now to move to Yuan Yang MP. Ms. Yang.
Thank you very much, Chair. I have some questions. I'll start with Mr. Russell on the so-called mansion tax and the high value council tax surcharge. I wonder if you could just first explain how properties are going to be valued and also how you'll handle the appeals process if any owners appeal.
I'll deal with how we do the valuation first, then the appeals process. They're two quite different things, if that's okay. So in terms of the high value council tax surcharge, I think it's worthwhile putting it in context. Currently, we value something in the region of 28 million properties for council tax banding, and that will include properties that could well be included in high value council tax surcharge because we have property attribute data on 28 million properties. That would include bedrooms, plot size, type of house, bungalow, detached, etc., whether they have a garage, parking. So we already have the basic valuation that we use to value properties for council tax banding, which is in 1991. So what we're doing is looking at that data we hold already, make sure that it's up to date and accurate. And then we'll be also looking at open source data, such as Office of National Statistics, land registry, sales data, and stamp duty land tax. So looking at those properties that are in the higher element of current banding, because of property data, and then seeing how that translates to other data, matching the two, and coming up with a valuation. We've already done some work on that, so we're thinking about how we can do some risking around the valuation, because obviously in the boundaries of where the tax may be applied, there's going to be more contention, so we need to make sure we're applying a lot more attention to those areas to make sure we get the valuation correct and accurate. And when we are doing the valuations, we'll make sure that we are public about it. We'll go out and tell people how we're doing the valuation, the criteria we're using, because at the end of the day, we want people to have confidence in the valuations that we produce, and we don't want there to be appeals, because that's in no one's interest. Yeah. So we want to make sure we're open, transparent, clear about the data we're using, clear about how we've applied it, and that will come to valuation.
Thank you. Sure. And just on when you say just check that, you'll firstly check if your current valuation of 28 million properties is up to date. For most people who see their own valuation see an early 1990s valuation. So could you just clarify what you mean by up to date?
So what we'll make sure is that we have the property attribute data on our system. So we make sure that property attribute data is still relevant. Has the house been extended? Has it been changed? Has indeed a big house been split into two? So look at that type of data, but it is looking at the valuation rather than 1991, probably the date this year that has yet to be set because it requires legislation.
Does that mean that you'll be revaluing or updating the valuation of a large number of houses outside of that 2 million range in order to find the main range? If so, is there a kind of threshold or a number of houses that you're planning to update the valuations of?
Yeah, that's a very good point. At the moment, we deal with around about 400,000 council tax valuations a year because people say their property's changed. As a result of the introduction of the high value council tax surcharge, estimates are that there'll be about 150 to 200,000 properties in scope. Obviously, the banding starts at 2 million. To your point about where we'll look at to make sure we're including properties that should be included, we haven't finalised it yet, but we'll probably look at houses that may have an indicative valuation of 1.5 million, just to make sure we're not missing anything. And obviously, if houses are clearly above the upper level, which is 5 million, then we won't spend too much time looking at those either. It'll be looking at the ones in between those two levels to make sure we get the banding absolutely accurate. And, you know, it's what we do. Every year, for example, we will value somewhere in the region of 200,000 houses that have been new build.
Yeah.
So we do that anyway, but just valuing those built today, valuing them at 1991, and within that 200,000 there'll be some houses that will meet the criteria for the high value council tax surcharge.
And just one last thing on that process. Is that process of valuation that you described for the kind of 1.5 to 5 million range, is that essentially the same process you would use to value properties outside of that range as well? It's not different in kind? Okay.
We look at the property attribute data, location, bedroom numbers, size, type of house, detached, semi-detached. It's how we do the valuation, is what we do. So we do valuations, we've been doing it for a long time. On the appeals process, it's probably worthwhile pointing out that the process, the high value council will actually require legislation and also consultation. So I know there's plans to do consultations in the next few months, and that consultation will look at, for example, reliefs, appeals, how you might challenge your council tax banding, the scope, complex areas around ownership, because the billing will actually be not on the occupier, but it will be on the owner of the property. So again, there'll be consultation around that, and that will include how you might appeal it. And again, that hasn't been set out yet, that's still work in progress.
Are there any exemptions, because there have been exemptions on second council tax, which I know is not your area of work, but are there any exemptions for things like charities, convents? I don't know, just
that's still to be worked through, Chair, I think, because
yeah.
it could be things like, old people's homes, convents, that type of thing. Is it included or is it not? That's going to be part of the consultation. And it's very important for us, we're not leading on that consultation, but it is an opportunity. We want to be very clear about how we will do the valuation, because I said we want people to trust it and have faith in it, because it's a valuation to us, but it's their home. We need to make sure we're doing it properly and robustly.
Thank you, Mr. Russell. And can I clarify, is it the legal owner or the beneficial owner that's being taxed?
It's the legal owner.
It's the legal owner. And just moving on to Mr. Marks, I know that the collection will be done by local authorities. Will this lead to a number of local authorities who have, say, only 10 such high value properties in their patch, having to put in place more processes in order to handle a smaller number? Do you have a number or estimate for how many local authorities that would apply to? And is there a reason why local authorities, you think, are better placed than HMRC to collect this tax, given the national nature of it?
Well, I think the second point, that has just been the practice over years now, that is how the valuation office make the valuation, councils send out the bills and collect the tax. But I do take your point around a small council that has a small number of properties, and given the measures just been announced, if that is a concern that's been raised, I think as part of the consultation on the process around appeals, around exemptions, obviously we want this measure to work well, and there will of course be more properties in certain parts of the country than others. So if we need to work with MHCLG and with councils to understand the challenges of administration and make sure they've got what they need, then we'll be happy to do that.
And is the mechanism for collection part of the consultation discussion? If many councils come back and say, look, this is really not worth it for us.
Consultation, is it?
I'm not sure it'll be in scope of the consultation, but as part of developing the legislation required to make sure this tax is delivered, it will be government discussions with local authorities and others about how we make it work effectively and efficiently. And yes, there will be some local authorities that may not have any within scope. There'll be some that have quite a large number, because most of the properties in scope are going to be in London, the South East and the East. And I think they already have mechanisms for collecting council tax. Yeah. So in a sense it exists already, because at the moment local authorities are the main beneficiaries of council tax. The vast majority of their funding comes from business rates or council tax, so that's why they have the system set up. So it just seems, I think, a logical progression to use a similar system for this tax as you have for council tax, but I think it will still be looked at.
Thank you. I'm just bringing Mr. Glenn briefly.
Yes, I'm concerned about the sort of complexity of the operations that you currently have to deal with, and what the challenge of trying to absorb quite a new responsibility. Now, I understand that the VOA routinely takes 9 to 12 months to process applications from owners seeking to move from, say, self-catering properties from council tax to business rates, and they're quite narrow, evidence-based determinations. How can you convince us and the public that your existing workload of valuations, which is already challenging, can be accommodated and improved, ideally, alongside this new significant responsibility for which, it will be very contentious for some people. But obviously the government's policy is, rested on this. I mean, Mr. Marks talked to us about the stress testing of all the different changes and processes, you being a sort of essentially fused into HMRC. How do you reassure us?
Yeah, there is certainly a lot of work on in the Valuation Office Agency, but we have a strong track record of delivering. For example, we've just delivered a revaluation of 2.1 million non-domestic properties. We've done a valuation in Wales for council tax of 1.5 million properties. We've done work for DfE on valuing schools or measuring schools so they can determine how best to use them. And as I said, we deal with roughly like 400,000 council tax valuations a year, 200,000 new build. So to put it in scale, we're talking about some in the region of 150 to 200,000 properties in scope of the high value council tax surcharge. We will be able to deliver that. I'm very confident in that. There has been issues, I think it's fair to say, with the council tax over the last 12 months because a year ago we introduced the new technology system because the old system was on its knees basically. We introduced a new system, and when that was introduced there was a blip in performance as it bedded in and as people got used to it. But because we've made some resets to that technology and people are now getting more familiar with it, we're actually delivering something in the region of 3 times more per week in terms of council tax valuation.
With respect, most agencies of all government departments make those plans, and you're an experienced civil servant, and these unforeseen problems arise.
It's the real world.
And on the sort of balance of probabilities, it's likely across all the new things that you've got to do, we've already discussed several of them this morning, that one of them's going to go wrong. I mean, how do you sort of, use your experience to justify that degree of optimism going forward, Mr. Russell?
I use it because over the last few years, it's very helpful that we introduced the system last year, not this year. That's a lack of timing. But also over the last few years, it's been very clear to make sure that we have a very flexible workforce, because a while ago it was quite rigid. You did one business line or another. That isn't the way we can cope now. We need to make sure people are multitasked, multi-skilled, and we have developed that over the last few years. And in the priority work for such as I mentioned, the Welsh council tax reval, we hit all the targets for that, that was green. The non-domestic rating reval, 2.1 million properties revalued, that was all green. So in terms of the large-scale delivery, we can certainly deliver on that. I've got no doubt about that at all.
All right. Good luck.
Thank you very much. Catherine West.
Thank you, Chair. I wanted to ask about the owners versus the renters being liable for this measure, and wanted to ask, is this something new for the department to be grappling with? Some open source have suggested understanding who are the owners of properties is sometimes quite hard. Have you taken that into calculation in terms of the scheme? And also,
should we take one at a time? So do you want to answer that, Mr. Russell?
Yep.
You're absolutely right. It's not what we do with council tax. Council tax is on the occupier, not the owner, so it is a change. Our role is very specific. We do the valuation, and then once we've done the valuation, the billing is going to be, as we discussed earlier, is going to be for others. So it's not something that we've been directly involved in, but it is something I understand that will be done as part of the consultation, because as you say, some of the ownership mechanisms are complex and wanted to work efficiently and effectively, so that will be part of the consultation, and that will be included in the legislation when it goes through the House as well.
My understanding, Chair, is that there are some circumstances where local authorities do not know who owns properties in their own jurisdiction. And my other question was about whether the officials envisage that over time the measure, which is the liability is on the owner of the asset rather than the occupier. Is there an impression that this might grow in popularity in terms of the way it's administered? I can't ask you the policy question, of course, but it's just in other jurisdictions it's quite normal for an owner of an asset to be liable as opposed to somebody who is renting the property, for example.
Yeah. I really can't answer that point.
Well, it's a question for ministers.
I had a very quick one, which was, is there a scheme whereby there could possibly be a charge on the property over time in order to give time to find out who the owner of that property is? How will that work, that mechanism? Because I suspect it could take quite some time to establish ownership of some of these properties. And is there a proposal to make that accrue? Has that thinking been done?
Mr. Russell.
There's quite a lot of things to be done, I think, through the legislative process and the consultation process. For example, what is the valuation date, when the bills will land? I think it's 2028, for example. And I'm sure there'll be some element about finding some package that will actually have we found the ownership yet or not. But again, that's not for me to answer, but I'm sure it'll be included in that.
You're envisaging legislation in the finance bill, next finance bill as well, or is it going to be separate?
That is still being discussed, I think, because at the moment some of the regulations with MHCLG, it may well be in the finance bill. Again, that's one of the points to be discussed.
Okay, because it could be across different departments. You've got well, there's lots more we could go into there, but I'm sure we'll come back to that at a future session. Dame Harriet Baldwin, please.
Thank you, Chair. And I'd like to ask Mr. Russell about business rates, because obviously there are two things going on that have given pubs and hospitality businesses a nasty shock at the budget. One is the policy decision about the withdrawal and tapering of the COVID support, but the other is around the valuation of those premises, which I understand, Mr. Russell, your area is responsible for. So can you talk us through, was there anything unusual about this valuation? Because it does seem to have led to a lot of shock from many businesses, not just pubs and hospitalities, about the sharp increase in the valuations they've seen.
Mr. Russell.
Yeah. There's nothing unusual about how we carried out the valuation for the 2026 list as opposed to the 2023 list or indeed the 2017 list. Particularly with pubs, we've been doing it in a similar way for over 20 years now. We have a pub rating forum that includes industry representatives such as British Beer and Pub Association, UK Hospitality, British Institute of Innkeeping. So we've been engaging with those business representatives throughout the process. We use what we call rental evidence, and at the outset of the valuation process we do a call out for businesses to send us their rental evidence in, and there are about 36,000 pubs, 37,000 pubs in the list. That's been roughly the same since 2017 to now, and of those 38,000 pubs we had 20,000 forms of return coming in from the pub saying this is the rentable evidence we have, because rateable value is based on rent basically. So we've got that rentable evidence. We then take that rentable evidence. Is it okay to carry on and work?
Please, yeah.
So we take that rentable evidence and then we work with the trade association representatives to say, okay, this is the rentable evidence we've got. Then we categorise the pubs into location, because that has a big impact on what the rent may be. For example, a city centre or town pub per square foot probably turns over more than a rural pub. So we classify the pubs into those three areas: city centre and town, urban fringe, and then rural. And what we then do is then look at something called fair maintainable turnover. So what we're trying to do is make sure we're valuing the property and not the business. So the fair maintainable turnover looks at what could a pub in one of those categories reasonably expect to turn over with a reasonable landlord. And we take that and we say, okay, as part of that, what do we think of that fair maintainable turnover could be allocated to rent? And say, for example, for a city centre or town pub, that fair maintainable turnover, we allocate a percentage of that within the region of 7 to 13%. For a rural pub, because I said square footage isn't a true indicator of profitability, we look at something like 2.5 to 7.5%. We then we put those pubs in the categories, then apply that broad range, we look at the individual circumstances, and that comes up with the rateable value. And that's been the process we've used for at least 20 years.
But this time it seems to have taken people hugely by surprise, and the pub association is saying that there's going to be vast amounts of additional beer needing to be sold in order to make this economic. So did this time around, did you find that there were more pubs and hospitality businesses that were seeing a sharp increase than you would at a normal revaluation?
Yeah, it's...
And if so, how many?
Okay, we were working closely with the Industry and Trade Association, because we don't want there to be surprises. That's not what we want. So we did work closely with them to give you an indication of how many, and it indicates, I think, that we apply quite a scalpel-like approach to the valuations, not just a broad brush blanket approach. So yes, over the whole sort of revaluation from the 23 list to the 26 list, on average, the rateable value has gone up by 32%.
32%?
Within that range, 15% of pubs are up 5,400 have actually seen their rateable value decreasing. Some will have seen it going up by 0 to 29%, some 30% or more. So yes, there has been an increase. If you then go back to the 2017 list, which had a rateable value, the whole rateable value sector had a rating value of 1.4 billion, as opposed to the rating 26 list had an overall rateable value of 1.5 billion. So the actual rateable change between the 2017 list and the 2026 list is about 8%. There was obviously a blip because of COVID. If you think about how the industry has been affected by COVID, there wasn't much of a turnover, wasn't much fair material trade, so that had an impact on the rentable evidence. And at the end of the day, that's what we do. We follow the rentable evidence. We don't make it.
You flagged to your minister in advance of the budget that 32% was a big hike compared to previous hikes, and that therefore there might be a political issue coming out of this valuation when you combine that with withdrawing the COVID era support. Did you flag that?
We are part of a wider ecosystem for business rates. We're very clear about what our role is. We do the valuations, we do it in a fair, open, transparent way. We want them to be trusted. We know that work then goes into central government for ensuring that local authorities are funded properly, that the decisions around tax are made. So there is a process for sharing data throughout the valuation, and we follow that process.
And was that process, part of that process, saying, by the way, Minister, Chancellor, you're looking at a political problem here because this is a huge increase for this sector?
Yeah.
The process includes a series of what we call data drops, basically. So we do the valuation, we take the beginning of the valuation, and we do those data drops over a period of 12 months. And that data will include pretty much every classification of sectors in England. And we can't show individual, obviously, because we're not allowed to do that. But it will show at a sectorial level what the impact of the revaluation is.
Do you know what was the highest increase in value that you saw?
In pubs.
Pubs, yeah.
Some of them will have gone up in the region of, let me think about it, doubling. Some will have doubled. A small number, around about 13% will have seen their valuation doubled.
How many over 40%? Because you went to 32% as an average, you're saying, or something that's quite a lot.
Yeah, it's about 5,100 pubs will have seen their rateable value doubled.
Is there any pattern as to why those valuations went up so much? That's double is a lot.
It's based on evidence, Chair. We look at, as I said, the rentable evidence that we get from the request to send data into us. We then look at the fair maintainable turnover, and that will take into account things like wet sales, dry sales, accommodation.
Just to be clear, so that's wet sales, drinks.
Oh, sorry.
Dry sales, food.
Food is, yeah.
But Mr. Russell, what I'm not hearing you say, as you're the person responsible for the overall organisation, is you sent a great big data file somehow to ministers for them to work out what the impact would be in terms of the budget. Did you at any point flag that was a huge increase by historic standards and therefore, might be something that they want to take into account? Did you do that?
Over the whole list, we make it very clear that there are changes in rateable value because of the work we're doing. I think JP wants to come in.
Yeah, so as you know, ministers announced a multi-billion pounds, £4.3 billion package of
Additional
reliefs.
relief.
Exactly.
That was because they had been told that this could be a problem.
Well, they had the data from those various data drops, as in the policy teams have that across the partnership, Treasury, MHCLG, such that you can make a judgment about multipliers and reliefs. So as you say, start with what is the rateable value and how has that changed relative to the previous lists, and then what does that mean for reliefs?
Because the Chancellor said yesterday that she didn't appreciate what the impact would be, and I just wondered if her officials had given her...
Just to be clear, I just want to make sure I hadn't misheard you, Mr. Russell, just before I bring Harry back. You said that, what did you say, 5,100 pubs had more than 40% increase in rateable value?
That was doubling.
That was doubling. Yeah. So 5,100...
Or their rateable value doubled.
So their rateable value doubled.
And 5,400 had it decreased, yeah.
Thank you.
A couple of other things that are not related to this particular sector, but again, I've been told by Eurotunnel that their rateable value went up from 40 million in 2023 to 2026 it's 118 million. These just seem to be enormous changes. And the other thing that has been flagged to me by a range of different sources is that you've also at the valuation agency started to take a different approach to shared office space, so that previously it was each individual business that was charged the rate, and because they were small businesses, they often benefited from that exemption. And now you're doing the valuation at the building level, and that's causing a huge increase in rates for these small businesses. Was that a policy decision that was taken by a minister, or is that something that the valuation office chose to do differently?
With regards to the first question, I obviously can't comment about individual ratepayers.
It does seem like a huge increase, doesn't it?
I'd going to come on to say that what we do is we have a legal duty to maintain accurate rating lists and to make sure we do the valuation that's in accordance with approved standards, our Royal Institute of Chartered Surveyor standards, recognised both internationally and nationally. And we need to make sure that the valuations do are robust, because they could well be legally challenged in a land tribunal or upper tribunal chamber. And we're very clear and open about the process that we follow. And indeed, the industries follow the same standards. They're doing valuations as well. On the serviced offices point, let's say we have to maintain legal duty to maintain lists accurately. Sometimes the case law will change, and we need to reflect that change of case law. And in particular with serviced offices, it's around what we call the unit of assessment. And there is some case law indicating that the unit of assessment is different. So when you have a large block and the individuals' office spaces within that, case law now is indicating that rather than do the individual spaces as unit of assessment, it is indeed, as you say, the whole block that's assessed. Now, in most cases, the small serviced offices within that block will benefit from small business rates relief. And I think it's worth pointing out that there are something like 700,000 small businesses in this country that don't pay business rates because they benefit from small business rates relief, and something like 750,000 will benefit from the lower multipliers for retail, hospitality and leisure. So a lot of the office space or the offices in shared services will not pay business rates because they benefit from the small business rates relief. But the owner of the occupier of the overall property may well have then a business rates liability.
If you could kindly follow up by writing to the committee about the details on that case law, that would be helpful.
And because obviously it came up in COVID as well, so it's
happy to do that.
Thank you, Chair. Very briefly, the recording studios are saying that they're now being viewed as offices, and therefore their rates have gone up, and that they will have to close because of this increased cost. And I just wanted to ask about that, because the creative sector is often a little bit anomalous.
What's the question particularly?
So the question is, why has the decision been made sort of at the technical level that recording studios for the creative sector, which is obviously key to the London constituency, they're being considered, I believe, as offices, and therefore their rates have shot right up, and they're saying they will have to close.
Mr. Russell.
Sometimes there's no specific industry sector to say this is how we do recording studios, because a recording studio, I guess, could be in a warehouse, in an office. So we'll do the valuation as we think the prime purpose of that premises is. I know, for example, film studios, they're still benefiting from relief. Recording studios aren't. So it's a bit like music venues. Music venues could be a village hall, a pub, or an arena. So there's not an actual sector-specific approach to it. We look at the circumstances pertaining at the time. So if it's within scope of valuation and it takes it above the small business rates relief, that's the valuation we've done.
Okay, so maybe a campaign from West there with ministers.
And it's on rentable evidence.
Briefly, Bobby Dean MP.
Yeah, just a quick one about timing. When did the government receive that information for the first time that business rates look set to go up by 32%?
First data drop was about a year ago, and that data drop was around about 50% of the valuations being completed at that stage. So it was still sector specific, broken down by sectors, and it gave an indication that having done 50% of the valuations, this is the indication in terms of rateable value increase.
They knew the direction of travel about a year ago.
That's when the first data drop was, yes.
Thank you.
And obviously going through a lot of technical things. James Siobhan, very briefly.
Sorry, Chair, I may be being a bit slow here, but the dividing line between technical and policy, I mean, while obviously it's the Treasury's duty to decide what the rules are in the budget and all the rest of it, what responsibility would the valuation office have to put an interpretation to ministers about their proposed increases?
Would that be Treasury officials number crunching? Is that
yeah. So you drop a lot of data. What responsibility would you have, Mr. Russell, to say, this is the data, please be aware?
Mr. Russell.
We're very aware of our role in the business rates and indeed the council tax ecosystem. There's no point us doing our job if no one else knows about it.
No, that's not my point.
I'm sorry.
Yeah,
so we're constantly engaging at official level about what's happening. So in certain sectors, because we know that as a result of our work, people will make decisions around reliefs and local authority funding. So we're constantly engaging at official level, daily, weekly, with what the valuations are showing us.
Thank you.
Yeah, but do you just show what's happening, or do you say to people who are dealing with a million things every day and not just dealing with valuations, be very conscious of this?
Yes.
You would give that interpretation, explain.
Official level, yeah. Thank you very much, Mr. Russell, very clear. Chris Coughlin, MD.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Russell, just on that, I've got many pubs in my constituency going bust as a result of this. Are you not slightly shooting yourself in the foot if you're causing businesses to go bust and therefore raising less tax?
Our job is to carry out valuations.
It's a technical.
That's what we do.
Yeah.
We work very closely with industry representatives in pubs and elsewhere, and with the agents representing those businesses too, and indeed directly with businesses. We are aware of the circumstances and the challenges, but we have, as I said, a legal duty to make sure our valuations are accurate and legally compliant. We can't do.
Yeah, I think we're very clear about your legal response. Perhaps we could move on, Mr. Coughlin, to.
And on, sorry, I'm very interested in cash ISAs and the changes to that. Could you explain to me, please, how you will implement the both the charge on any interest in a stocks and shares ISA, the test to determine whether an investment should be either cash like investment, whether it's stocks and shares ISAs, and how you will collect the extra data you need from ISA providers and the general complexity of this. How will you manage that challenge?
Yeah, if it's okay, Keris.
Ms. MacDonald.
Yeah, no, of course. So the Chancellor's obviously set out a very clear set of policy changes to support the ISA rules at the moment. Those changes will require regulation, so we will be laying regulations in Parliament with all the kind of framework of rules that will need to sort of support that policy change. You're absolutely right to be highlighting some of the live issues that are currently working through with industry, which does include what the definition of cash-like products, which could be held under a stocks and shares ISAs, might look like. My team are today holding a 3-hour-long meeting with industry representatives to work through all of that. Some of these rules were in place in the pre-2014 regime. That has been our pushing off point to think about the new framework, but we absolutely accept that the savings industry, the savings market looks very different today than it did back in 2014, so we're not wedded to a lift and shift of those regulations, which I think some people have been arguing, and we are working through all of that detail as we speak. And as I said, the regulations will be laid in Parliament in due course.
And why was 65 chosen as the cut-off age for the maintaining existing cash ISA? Given, or did you take legal advice on that? And given that that doesn't match the state pension age?
Yeah, no, of course. So I think the Chancellor was really mindful of the fact that people of pensionable age have got sort of different risk-reward appetites and have got a more conscious of liquidity than maybe people below or not of pension age, and that informed the decision to restrict the cash limits for those under 65 as opposed to those over 65. Of course, we always take legal advice when we are advising ministers on policy changes. We've got really good data to support that liquidity argument. We know that those with ISA holdings over 65 hold more of their ISA savings in cash ISAs, and I'm confident that that is a sort of legally robust policy decision.
Sure. And I mean, this all sounds quite complicated to me. Will you need extra resources to manage this? The implementation of this?
No, I don't envisage needing more resources to support these ISA changes. Actually, a couple of years ago now, before these changes were announced, we had secured funding to modernise the way that we administer ISAs So currently, the only data that we receive from an ISA provider is at the end of the tax year. It's quite a kind of manual data uplift, and it supports our current ISA audit programme, reflecting the many changes in the ISA policy framework that we've seen over multiple years. The compliance risks around ISAs now are greater, and we are talking about a tax relief worth £9 billion. So we are moving to a system where we will get monthly sort of real-time reporting from ISA providers that will enable us to then match people's subscription levels to investors, spot if someone has oversubscribed, and then sort of signal to the ISA provider that some steps will need to be taken to correct that. So I'm really confident that we will have a much more modern and responsive and automated process to support customers to get it right. That change is not coming in until April 28. We are very alive to the fact that industry have got a lot of change to grapple with, and so at the budget we did confirm that we would delay that by a year to give us and industry more time. And I think that's the right decision.
Okay, so you've just said you're moving from receiving yearly reporting to monthly reporting, but you don't need extra resources. How does that work? Or are you saying the automation offsets that?
Well, firstly, what we are, in terms of the kind of overall compliance, what we will be looking at is people oversubscribing above the limits. Most people do not reach anywhere near their ISA limit, so we're not talking about a significant compliance risk here, but of course there are people that inadvertently do breach, and what our monthly reporting system will do is automatically recognise if someone has breached one of those limits, notify automatically the ISA provider that someone might have breached the 20,000 limit or the 12,000 in due course, and ask the ISA provider to take steps to allow the customer to sort of self-correct. So I think that's a much more modern system to be administering this regime rather than HMRC doing, more intense downstream compliance work. It's a really good novel upstream compliance intervention.
Yeah. Thank you. Dame Siobhan McDonald.
Yeah, back to really that borderline between implementation and advice and technical and an opinion. Looking at ISAs, they generate about £1.45 in revenue for every pound spent. When you get changes to these models, do you look at how that's impacted by impacts of changes in the system, or would you just think we just need to introduce these?
Could you just unpack that first point of your question?
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah. If you look at proposed changes in the lifetime ISA,
the lifetime ISA, sorry.
Yeah,
yes.
They already make significant money for the revenue and for the country. Not suggesting it's for you personally, but has the HMRC deemed it more effective in terms of future tax revenue to introduce a new product and forfeit what you already make from ISAs, or would you just think, well, that's not our business, we'll just...
No, so the advice that ministers get on all aspects of tax policy and on savings especially, we work hand in glove with the Treasury to advise ministers on those decisions. So I do see those things as matters for us as well as Treasury and Treasury ministers. On the lifetime ISA specifically, and really welcome the work that this committee did on that last year, we know that the current model of having a sort of hybrid product where people can either opt to use it for pension purposes or for later life purposes or for first-time buyers does cause quite a lot of confusion and can mean people inadvertently end up with the withdrawal charge, and that can be seen as punitive. So the position that ministers came to, supported by advice from us, was that a new product that was much more focused on the first-time buyer market would be preferable, but ministers have been clear that the existing LISA product will continue for those holders. Yeah. And I think that strikes the right balance.
So that's for those who've got it, just to be clear. Yeah, so
right.
whatever changes.
They won't lose out. Yeah.
Thank you, Dame Siobhan. Jim Dixon, MP.
Thank you, Dame Meg. Just a couple of questions on changes to the loan charge. I've got a small number of constituents of the 37,000 or so households nationally affected by the loan charge, and obviously the view taken by HMRC since about 2017 on how that should be repaid. I know a number of those constituents will be relieved to see that the Treasury has accepted the great majority of the recommendations of the McCann review, including not charging interest for late payment and making deductions to some of the liabilities. So that's all good for them. However, can I ask where this leaves and the better settlement opportunity now on offer, where that leaves those who've already settled on less advantageous terms?
Well, thank you for your question, and I'm pleased that your constituents have been able to, recognise the revised settlement offer following the McCann review. I think my message to anyone who has not yet settled under the loan charge is to be in touch with HMRC. So we have a dedicated case manager ready to work with customers. We think there's around 37,000 outstanding liabilities to settle. Most could see reductions of 50%. We think around a third may now not have to pay anything at all. But because of the complexity of each case, we need them to contact us and work us through to sort that out. The team are ready to do that, and I hope our customers will be able to take advantage of the revised settlement that ministers announced in the budget. It was ultimately the scope of the McCann review was to try and provide that pragmatic settlement for those that had not settled, and that was always its intent. We think we can deliver it, of course, and the most important thing being to establish contact to work it through, but those who have already settled were outside of the scope of the review.
So should those who have already settled at less advantageous terms than are now on offer, should they approach HMRC to discuss that, or is that just history finished, sorry, you settled at the wrong time on the wrong terms?
Well, customers that have settled those tax affairs under previous legislation, and that is complete. As I say, the McCann review and the revised settlement focused on those that were remaining, and the intent was to provide a pragmatic route to settling and bringing the loan charge hopefully to a conclusion. Obviously, if there are customers of HMRC who are struggling with a large historic tax liability, we recognise that creates anxiety. It can be a struggle. We have time to pay arrangements, extra support team in place. So of course, if anybody is wanting to access additional support, then they're always welcome to contact us.
Because obviously one of the things that you're seeking to do as a result of the McCann review is often to ensure that there are payment terms stretching into the future.
Yes.
Over a longer period.
Yes.
Which clearly makes it easier for those attempting to settle.
Yes.
So those who've already settled but still have outstanding payments might be able to have a conversation, for instance, about the length of the period of settlement.
Right, in terms of their time to pay arrangements. And we spoke earlier about our approach under our charter. We've worked hard, and there's recommendations in the review that reflect on the importance of co-design of our material and how we engage this customer caseload, learning from the past and applying that into our additional support model. I spent a lot of time with the team. They're very want to take a lot of care because we recognise the complexity of it all. But absolutely, and this is true for any taxpayer who might have a historic tax liability or a tax debt, they can access additional support, time to pay arrangements, and according to their means, spread those payments over time.
Thank you very much. Well, we've covered quite a lot of the budget stuff, so I want to get to some of the core processes that you're responsible for. So customer service is always a very important issue, and we touched on some of this at the beginning, but I just want to delve into a couple of points. You're trying to make people go down the digital channels, and you've got this plan to move from 80% engagement to 90% engagement. So how's that going, and what do you need to do to make sure you keep on track?
So far on track, slightly ahead of schedule. So I mentioned, I think last data we published was 79.8 or something %, so not quite 80, but nearly. Climbing the mountain as we go. Objective to get to 90. There's not one big thing, sadly, that makes the leap. It's lots of marginal change, but that's also a healthy thing. We have a number of programs that are geared toward enabling that digital first strategy. So this year we will onboard a new contact centre system which will enhance our telephony service. What
will that look like for a taxpayer in Europe?
So we've talked before about some of the challenges of call waiting, cut-offs, abandoned calls, and how that feels, and we know that's not modern, it's not good enough, it's not what we want to see. The CCAS system will give us more modern features around real-time call waiting times, more capacity. We hope that we'll see a much significantly reduced number of calls that would ever be cut off. That would be hopefully only ever if it was some sort of contingency event or whatever. We've got a program ultimately to try and reduce the amount of outbound mail that we send. We send a high volume of correspondence every year. And where we've got customers who are using the app, using their digital tax accounts, we want to make sure that we have the capability to engage with them digitally with their correspondence through that channel. That reduces some costs, but also shifts some of that activity as well online. So yes, lots of changes in the PAYE system around reporting on expenses, around benefits in kind. We've got Making Tax Digital going live in the spring, which Jonathan can talk to. And we'll just keep reporting progress against the 90.
Is it going to be a steeper curve, isn't it, getting from 80% to 90%?
We went up, we were about 75, 76 at this time last year, so up about 4 in 12 months. So, in 2026 to 2030, if we carried on at that rate, we'd be okay.
Okay, Mr. Glenn.
Yeah, I just feel duty-bound to ask about vulnerable customers and people that are anxious. They'll hear this and think, well, there's no time for me. I'm very uncomfortable adjusting to this digital world. How can you reassure those customers that aren't in that place of comfort, maybe for whatever reason, typically older perhaps? What can you say to reassure them, given the trajectory you've set out?
It's really important that we also improve our extra support service for those customers. This is not meant to be an either or. I think it's possible to improve both at the same time. So you have a better digital offer that people want to use on their phone in their convenience, and at the same time increase and improve additional support. We just talked about a case manager model for more complex compliance cases as an example. We are working with around 11 voluntary sector partners across the UK for additional advocacy support, which we're keen to do more of as well. So for those customers who don't want to engage HMRC but have a tax problem, actually,
do you have a metric for how you improving the way you deal with that group of people?
Partly volume. Are we supporting more customers through those partnerships, for example, through the voluntary sector, so we can see that they are being supported and not lost in the system, if you like, with nowhere to go. So we track those metrics around that. We're increasing the size of our extra support teams as well, so more headcount into those. And then ultimately, Mr. Glenby, indicators like complaints, adjudicator, investigations, serious cases. We have a set of indicators to sort of give us confidence that services are improving. And if I'm really honest, digital customer interactions is but one of those. Ultimately, we want people to be supported, whatever the channel, once and done at the point of contact in a timely way with the professionalism that they should expect from us. We publish that data every quarter, so you can see it all. Customer satisfaction, for example, multi-channel, and so that's the intent, to go on that journey and improve service every year.
Thank you. And we touched briefly on AI at the beginning. Is AI going to help make this easier from the customer? You talked about AI at the system end, your end, summarising calls and so on. Is there anything that will benefit the customer different other than that?
Yeah, so I think colleagues will be used to using AI tools where you sort of ask a question and it gives you the breakdown. So we have Ask HMRC, which is one of our web-enabled assistant tools. we'll be looking at how we can be using AI to support customers to find the next best
so your
piece of
chatbots will be
advice.
better.
Yeah, exactly.
And how are you going to make sure, you talked to earlier about one of the things keeping you awake is security overall of the system. A wrong bit of information in an AI model could cause quite a lot of havoc in the tax system. So are you putting any special measures around AI in that respect?
We have quite a lot of special measures around it. Jonathan might say a bit about Professional Standards Committee, which Jonathan chairs, around ethics and control. We also have an AI board, which is chaired by another one of our DGs. So all of our AI use cases are subject to a lot of scrutiny and testing. As you say, we use a lot of advanced technology already, of course. So secure data, keeping our data within our parameter with regular monitoring is core business. We want to exploit the opportunities of AI, but we absolutely want to do it in a safe and secure way.
As well as the security threat, there's the challenge of people writing in using AI-generated letters, citing the case. I think we've talked about this before, Mr. Athau. So how, Mr. Athau, are you dealing with that? Because that must be a huge resource issue at a time when you're having to reduce headcount and increase people in compliance and valuation.
So I think there's a couple of things to say. One, on people who are trying to abuse the system in one way will use a variety of tools. I don't want to get into the details here of the tools we are seeing, but we are seeing those sorts of developments. So we have extensive extensive capabilities to look and understand and counter those sort of challenges. So very alive to the use of AI to abuse the tax system. But we also work, we are not the only player in this space. Increasingly, we are seeing a lot of software services that people are using to file tax returns. And we are developing with the software industry a set of AI principles that we expect software providers, providing accounting or tax software, to abide to. So we're working on that at the moment. We're hoping to publish that quite soon.
Will that be sort of kite marked so that people know they're using a
I think that will be the long-term aim. I think initially, this is very new and evolving process. So we want to put out some standards. We want people to engage with them, and we want then businesses to sign up to them, so they can say yes, we abide by the principles, and give people confidence. But this is a very fast-moving area. The technology is moving very, very quickly. So I don't want to overpromise on how quickly we can get there, but we do want people, whether it's using our tools or using other people's tools, to have some transparency around how AI is used and to have some confidence in that. So that is something we're working with, and as I said, the industry itself is also very engaged in, because the industry knows this is a challenge for it.
Yeah, you're one of the biggest customers facing organisations in across Whitehall, so you're at the forefront with DWP, I guess, on some of this.
Yes, indeed. And as I said, the challenge for us is not just our own AI, but the AI of others who interact with us. Yeah. That is also an area where, as I said, that's why we want the guidelines for software providers.
That's certainly an interesting area across the committee corridor. Different committees are looking at how AI is used, so it's something maybe we want to come back to at some point. And making tax digital, obviously, going live in April, is that deadline? That's going to happen?
Yes, there is nothing I know of at the moment that means there's any doubt about that.
Very carefully worded there.
Well, we're on track. We have our own programme governance, and it's very important we continue to sort of monitor the risks as we get closer to implementation.
And if customers, do you think, fully aware? Because even though you could be talking about it endlessly in-house, but there's going to be a large cohort of people. So it's landlords and self-employed coming in April. Yeah.
So within that group coming in April, many of them are already using agents. I think around 60% of people or so are using agents. So for those people, we really need to talk to the accountants, the bookkeepers. And I'm confident there from the evidence we're seeing that we're seeing really high levels of understanding in the accounting industry about this and what needs to happen. Whether it's quite 100%, I don't know, but we're seeing good take up there. The challenge for us, the area we're focused on at the moment, is what we call the unrepresented group, those without an accountant. Now we have already written to them once, but we know, as we talked about with our correspondence, sometimes our correspondence is not scrutinised with the level of diligence we would like. So we are going to be writing to them again. We are but we do know a lot about the sectors those people are working in. Construction is a really big one. So we're also targeting the sectors either through targeted communications or through their sector bodies. we're writing to them. I was at an event actually hosted here last week by Sage and Checker Trade, looking at how digital tools can help small businesses. So there's a lot of awareness, and a lot of the players in that space are helping us, but it is a challenge. Yeah. One of the things we did announce last year was that in the first year there would be no penalties for those missed quarterly updates. Now it's a penalty point rather than a financial penalty, but you won't even accrue for penalties during that first year, because we know this is the first year we're doing it. There will be some people who come to this late. So we are...
Okay, so no, it depends on how does the penalty point system work? Is it like dry? I mean,
yes,
how many do you have to accrue before?
It depends on your reporting requirements, but essentially it's four for the...
Four, and what happens if you get 4 penalty points?
You then get a financial penalty.
Okay, so it's...
But you will have been told that you've had a penalty point before you've had it, before you do that. We think that's a fairer system than the current... You know, we're coming to the 31st of January. The current system has no penalty points. It goes straight to a financial penalty. Yeah. We think a penalty point system is
a new approach. Yeah.
And that will be rolled out as well for other taxes. But again, the number of penalty points depends on the reporting requirements. Yep. You can accrue more penalty points under Making Tax Digital because we have the quarterly updates. It's a slightly lower bar for those who remain on the traditional self-assessment.
And then just finally, in terms of tax take, because one of the things about Making Tax Digital is more real time, presumably there will be an uptick in tax in year, and so there will be a blip where you're not collecting tax on the old basis, you're collecting tax on the new basis. How are you managing to smooth that?
At the moment, the MTD, Making Tax Digital as it is, does not change the payment dates. Okay. It's only the reporting information. Now, we think that reporting information is very valid because we see problems within this cohort where people don't keep good records. So we think keeping records in software and updating them on a quarterly basis will encourage people to have that near real-time record keeping. So we think that will increase compliance and actually bring in additional.
Have you got a figure? What's the figure?
It's just under by the end of a year by the end of the rollout, it's just under £1 billion pounds. And again, that does vary as we update information on the assumptions, but it's just under £1 billion pounds. Separately, we did announce in the budget some changes, some proposed changes coming in later in the decade about how payments on account work for those who are also pay as you earn, but that's not Making Tax Digital. That does change the timing of payments, but that's a different measure. But Making Tax Digital on its own is only about reporting.
Okay. Thank you. That's very helpful. Are you in, Young MP?
Very much. Ms. Dath, I wanted to ask about the Knowledge Analysis and Intelligence Division, which is your kind of research division within your directorate, which has been recently commissioning Ipsos to better understand people who both own and manage their company, so company owner managers. And it seemed to me that through doing this work with Ipsos, you're essentially paying Ipsos to provide some information that you could have had from Companies House directly about company shareholders and directors. So I was wondering if KI already link Companies House data to tax data, and if not, why not?
Yes, we would normally. I will try and sort of set this in the context. What we will have is a lot of administrative data. So either data from HMRC systems, but we can also bring that together with Companies House data and sometimes data from other sources. Broadly speaking, that will tell us what has happened. So how much tax we're getting from particular taxpayers. Did a tax change raise the money we were expecting? Yeah. But often what we're trying to do, and particularly with things like, I'm not familiar exactly with this particular piece of research, but sometimes we need to understand why things have happened. And that doesn't come automatically from the data. As I said, the data tells you what's happened, but not why. So sometimes we will commission external research agencies like Ipsos Mori to do what we'd call qualitative research, to understand, as I said, what was the thinking behind decision making, why are company owner managers making decisions in particular ways. So we try and bring together all the data so we can answer ministerial questions, we can make certain our forecasts are up to date.
So you do already link, so KI already links that tax data to Companies House data within
we will link it to a number of sources. Now we will have lots of data sharing. Some of that data sharing is very modern and very up to date. Some of our data sharing is a little bit old, requires annual updates. So sometimes that data sharing is not as modern as we would like it to be. So
what falls into the latter category of being less modern, and what examples of?
So a good example, the one we are modernising at the moment, actually has also an effect on our service, is how we get data from banks and building societies. So we ask banks and building societies to provide us information on how much interest has been paid. So again, we can, for some people, back to the simple assessment, we can actually give them a tax bill without them providing any information. But at the moment that's done on an annual basis after the end of the year. It's not always done through APIs and those sort of approaches. So we are modernising those things because we think they will both have a benefit directly for taxpayers, directly for our customers, but also give us more analytical insight.
I've heard from some academic economists working on tax research that, in general, this kind of data that you shared with Ipsos to do that survey isn't shared with researchers. So I was wondering if there is a general rule about what you share with commercial researchers and what you share with academic researchers.
So we have something called the Data Lab, which allows researchers to ask for our data.
I'm familiar with
this is not data we can publish because it could be disclosive, so we put it in an environment. We provide, lots and lots of data sets to those researchers. There is a gateway for them to ask for additional data. So there's no principled reason why we would treat any data we hold differently. There are sort of security issues, but I wouldn't see, for example, with that example, any challenges around how we would share that data. So if there are concerns from researchers, please ask them to get in contact. Now, the Data Lab is only a physical environment. There's only a certain number of desks available. There is only a certain amount of computing capacity we have for this. So sometimes there are constraints on what we can do, but there's no in-principle decision about...
There's no distinction between sharing something with academic and commercial research?
No. We want to do the same, and often we get huge benefit from the Data Lab because that is work we're not paying for, but sometimes sheds light on really important questions for us.
Thank you very much. We saw one of the big changes that happened not in the budget just before Christmas was, of course, a change on the inheritance tax and business property relief for farms. The changes that were announced before Christmas, Mr. Marks, were you working on those as an option prior to the budget?
I don't think so.
It's but my point is they were announced after the budget, not at the budget. So was HMRC involved in discussions about that prior to the budget? No, you're saying no.
So if I deal with this, so obviously what in the budget a change was announced, the new £1 million limit. So that was a sort of parameter change within the existing system. Ministers then decided, in December that they wanted to make further changes to those parameters. So in some ways, all of these, when it's a change of a parameter, it's relatively straightforward. It wasn't a complete change to the sort of architecture of the policy. So in many ways, this was a
you're saying it's not as unusual as it might have seemed, because it's unusual usually to have that sort of announcement made. Not just outside the budget, but very close to a budget, so after a budget.
Yes. But again, what it was an extension of an existing policy. So in the budget, the limit went to £1 million. In December, it went to £2.5 million. So it was an extension of an existing policy rather than an entirely different sort of
relatively easy to administer, you're saying, from your
relatively straightforward for us to administer, and also for us to model. So, for example, we provided a tax impact and information note that was published, I think, on Friday, because this was being discussed in the Committee of the Whole House, I think yesterday or today. So we provided that information, and again, that was easy for us to do because it was a change in parameter to an existing
Obviously, system. From 2024 to that announcement before Christmas, has been quite a change in this policy. Which, and the press release announcing the change, the government talked about it stopping large inheritance tax relief for owners of large agricultural and business estates, while continuing to recognise that small farms had a role. Do you think, Mr. Marks, was a bit confusing what policy was being set out? Was it to do that, to stop the richest getting away without paying any inheritance tax, and to protect small farms from the beginning?
Well, I think, and this was just to clarify my answer to the previous question, is Minister's obviously been listening and talking to sector representatives ever since the original announcements were made around changes on inheritance tax. And as you say, came to that decision in December, made that announcement on the 23rd, and so we've published that impact assessment now.
Did you? Well, you asked about. You must have been asked because I mean, the revenue that comes in has reduced a bit, but it wasn't it wasn't massively significant number in context of the overall budget. Yeah. Presumably you were being asked to give figures for what would happen if the parameters changed and what that would.
So we would.
So
provide
you were providing that technical advice.
Yes.
When were you first asked to provide that advice?
Well, I think advice on options around inheritance tax has been provided over the last, year or two. Going back, looking at different.
Back to pre the 24 budget.
Indeed.
Okay.
As ministers got to the point of wanting to announce the change on the 23rd, of course, as Jonathan said, we've just published the impact note, and that has been informed by our impact assessment.
Okay. Unless anyone's got anything else on that, I'm going to move on to child benefit. So you wrote to us, I mean, so I have a number of issues here. One, first, I wonder if I could touch on the figures, first of all. You wrote to us, or to me, on behalf of the committee, in a 4-page letter, and you told me this is data up to the 31st of October. Told us that 3,673 out of 23,794 customers had their eligibility subsequently confirmed. So just to perhaps put it in context for anyone who's tuning in, this is when you matched people's travel plans with whether they should be claiming a child benefit. Yep. So people who flew somewhere and didn't return, you assumed had left the country and therefore were not qualifying. And in the pilot, you had included a check against PAY systems. So perhaps I should backtrack a bit. Why did you remove the check against PAY systems after the pilot?
So we've put the PAYE check back into the process now, and the PAYE check that was originally in the upfront risk rule was moved in the customer journey to the end of it, at the point of where there's a considerative decision rather than upfront. And that was done to streamline the process at operational level because of the view that that was a legitimate change that could be made. So it meant that you could do that check later rather than upfront. But clearly the effect of that was not what was intended, and we've put it back.
So just to be clear, it was check doing the PAYE check would take some time, so that you would have to keep paying child benefits. Someone you thought. I'm not quite sure. I'm a bit puzzled as to what, when moving it from one end of the process to the other, what was the benefit of that?
So that you could make it as part of the considerative decision rather than up front. So the team that we scaled.
Why? But if you did it up front, you wouldn't have made these errors, presumably.
Indeed. Yeah. So it's been put back, and the cases that were affected when the PAYE check was not in place have now all been checked and the payment reinstated, and we've apologised for making that error. I can go through the numbers if you like on the latest.
Oh, yes, but yes, if you could do that, because when Dan Tomlinson, as Exchequer Secretary, he wrote to Andrew Snowden MP,
yes.
And in that written answer gave figures as of the 30th of November, which were exponentially higher than the figures that you gave this committee. So I'm a bit concerned because as a committee, one of the many things we expect from you is that we get accurate numbers. Yeah. So could you perhaps talk us through those numbers, please?
So I wrote to you with accurate data at the end of October, and as you say, in the PQ response in November, those numbers had changed. So those that had been confirmed eligible in my letter was 3,673. That number in the November data was 14,994. The latest data for end December, that 14,994, this is not yet in the public domain, but for the committee is 17,048. So it has gone up from 63% to 71% of that cohort of the 23,000 where we made the error on the PAYE check. Of the residual that are there's those that we've determined non-compliant. That is currently at about 1,109, which is just under 5%. And then those that inquiries still open is 5,600, but that's where the customer has not responded to phone calls, letters, or anything, so deemed left the country.
So you've banked 5% of of the cohort you checked, 5% were basically fraudulent claims. Is that,
Well,
so there's a lot of pain to have gone through for.
Yes, currently confirmed 5, but we would assume that a large proportion of the inquiry still open cohort, the 23, will
What
also.
percentage of the overall cohort do you think might what's the range of from 5% to what?
I think it is more likely to settle down at between 30 and 50%. OBR scored it at 50%, the effectiveness of this risk tool, which obviously targets a very small number of child benefit customers who leave the country for more than 8 weeks, so that we are then confirming their eligibility. The cohort, though, the 23,000, the reason we need to take care not comparing it to the pilot is, of course, this is where we made the error and removed the PAYE check we shouldn't have done. And I do apologise for that. It has disadvantaged customers. We've been in touch with them. We took a very high trust model for then reinstating their claims based on a phone call or any contact we could get with them. And we've made other changes to the journey, so not just put the PAYE check back in, also put an additional month in. We've also removed any claims for any cases that might have been moving within the island of Ireland, and put additional support in around the government.
Well, I wouldn't mention the island of Ireland
process.
because I one of the things that appalled me about this is that you are one of the government departments that covers the entire UK.
Yeah.
So other departments might have a mild excuse that they only cover England, for example. But you cover all of the UK. So why didn't anyone pick up the common travel area issues, the issues of the border between Northern Ireland and the Republic? I mean, this just seems to me an egregious error from a UK government department.
I think when we piloted this and we identified, we did it with 200,000 cases, and within that we found 5,000 cases where we thought there was non-compliance. Now those numbers sound quite high, but if you actually look at it across the UK, there were probably only 140 cases in Northern Ireland we looked at. So some of these things may just not have come across. There may not have been enough cases for that to become apparent to us in that testing. So I think while we did the pilot, there was a question I think for me about why did that pilot not flush out some of the issues we then found in the scale up. And for Northern Ireland, it might have been simply that we didn't have enough cases in Northern Ireland for people who were travelling through the Republic to be picked up. So that is one of the.
It's not just the Republic, is it? From Northern Ireland to the Republic, you could actually come from England. Yes. On a ferry without you're checked now on what was at the ferry port, but you're not. There's no record of that movement, and people do sometimes do those journeys.
Yes.
So it's just I just really want some reassurance that you understand the common travel area and that you will in future make sure that something
indeed
embarrassing doesn't happen.
I think we do understand it. I think I pick out the Northern Ireland cases because they're the most likely. Obviously. Dublin Airport is very convenient for people in Northern Ireland, so I think it would be most pronounced there, but we didn't pick it up in that issue. We knew, more generally, we know the data we get from the Home Office on exits and entries is imperfect, and we were very clear of that all the way through, and it should only be the start of an inquiry, not determining whether somebody is eligible or not. But obviously, as JP has said, we've made changes to the process now.
So you had the pilot, you had the checks in place, then you removed them. I just still don't quite understand why you removed that check or moved it to a different part of the process, Mr. Marks.
Decision was made, it was related to trying to streamline the scaling of the operation, and the judgment, which was the wrong judgment, was that it would not have a material effect and that they could do the PAYE check at the end of the process as part of a considerative decision rather than up front. And because of the resourcing...
You keep saying use this phrase considerative decision, so I'm sorry, just perhaps unpack that.
Just when a decision maker will look at all the different elements, what the customer said, any correspondence, any other inquiry check we might have, any other data. So we would have the PAYE check as part of the decision making process rather than upfront about whether or not customers came into the...
There was nowhere in the process you said it was a wrong judgment. Or did anyone not think there might be unintended consequences and sort of model that?
I'm afraid that the effect was inadvertent. I mean, clearly we didn't want this to happen in this way, and we've apologised. I'm also, of course, very happy to write with the latest data for you if you'd like me to.
You didn't do an impact assessment on the change from the pilot to what you actually did.
And part of the learning is about strengthening the governance from pilot to business as usual, so that that error isn't repeated. And I would, to reinforce, we've reinstated, of course, the PAYE check. We've then retrospectively checked all of those 23,000 cases, and then we've reinstated the payments and backdated them all, so the customer's not worse off, and apologised. The important thing now is making all the changes to the customer journey, as you quite rightly say, Northern Ireland cases out, POI check in, more time in the journey, simplified customer communications, and we will take it very slowly this new year to get it right, because we do have a fraud and error exposure that is $250 million a year.
Yeah. We have no problem about you pursuing forward and error. I think we're clear of that as a committee.
But we need to do it with more care.
We take the apology. Ms West.
Very briefly, Chair, perhaps when you write back to the committee, could you outline your assessment of the effort it's taken and the lessons that have been learned in relation to other, let's call them targets of the HMRC, in terms of other fraud? For example, I note in other reading for this committee that some of the other white-collar fraud, for example, I think that's dropped in terms of the amount that the department is able to claim back these days, those sorts of things. So how much effort went into this particular group and the amount that you got out of it relative to, say, what we would understand as fraud in the city or other elements of fraud, how much effort goes into them? I don't know if that can be quantified, but it would be useful to know for this committee, because I think we need to be fair, and these families need to know that we're also taking quite a tough approach to other sorts of fraud.
We'll certainly be able to do that. We did a full evaluation, and we'll be able to look at both the additional or the money we will no longer be paying out compared to the resources we're investing, so we'll be able to do that for you.
Thank you. Yuan Yang, MP.
Thank you very much, Chair. Mr Marks, what's actually recently been dwarfed by the total size of child benefit is the total size of non-structural corporation tax reliefs being paid. And these have grown out by about 40% in nominal terms since the pandemic. Now, I'm not sure that productive behaviour by the companies receiving these reliefs has grown by 40% in the last 5 years. So do you think that this growth, this really rapid growth in non-structural corporation tax reliefs, is simply a result of growth in the advisory industry helping companies claim such reliefs?
Yeah, so I think it's always very difficult to look at post COVID. There's been lots of changes in the economy since COVID. I mean, we talked about the issues in terms of business rates and those sorts of things. So, I think we do monitor sort of reliefs more generally, and I would widen this to look at all reliefs. We do evaluate relief, so things like R&D tax credits, the patent box. We have done evaluations of that suggests they have a good return for the overall for the UK economy. So we take those into account, but we do monitor the growth in those reliefs, and where necessary take action. So not on the corporation tax space, but for example, employee ownership trusts, where there were changes made in the budget that responded to a significant growth, many times in the value of that relief. Likewise, we saw strong growth in the use of salary sacrifice with regard to pension contributions, and there are those issues. So, I know this committee has encouraged us to look very carefully at the changes in reliefs, in the take-up of reliefs, and to take action accordingly. Sometimes that relief does, as I said, come from the underlying activity, but sometimes those reliefs are used in ways that were not fully intended, or to the extent intended when
Okay, apologies for that. Okay, right, we're back. Gonna see what else we can do for you, show you. We'll be back shortly. I'll catch you soon. Thanks for watching.